You were meant to hear me say hello then. Gremlins in the system. Yes, hello and welcome to this week's video. Another colouring one, but not spalted wood. The beach effort from last week's video is still languishing somewhere in the shed, waiting for its salvation. But on more familiar ground here, using a technique similar in many ways to the blue and green ash bowl that I posted a couple of weeks back. This was rough turned, the piece of ash you can see on the lathe before you now, 3 or so years ago, and has moved a fair bit. You can see it's a crotch piece, some nice figuring going on in there. Not quite as spectacular, I don't think, as the blue and green one from 2 videos back, but all the same, still very attractive. In order to get it properly mounted and securely mounted on the lathe, you saw me put it between centres, which allowed me then to turn a foot on the bottom, put that in the chuck, and then turned a recess on the top, and I've now got that in some large jaws gripped in expansion mode so that I can get the back properly shaped. Going with an OG shape with a ring foot for it to sit on, and that chucking boss that you can see slightly out of true, that'll get tidied up so that I can use that to mount it back on the bottom of the bowl and turn the front a little later on. It was a little bit jumping about because of the unevenness and the way it had moved, so I just nibbled away a little bit. You can see the different lines there where I've removed some wood, and it's still not quite perfectly round, but hopefully you can see the gouge isn't bouncing around quite so much now, and is cutting much more uniformly. I do like using that pull cut, but I do have to work out how not to get the shavings hitting me in the face. There we go. You can see the back's got some very lovely grain in it, very attractive. The rim needs a bit of attention. Going to true that up. I find it important to get that rim established so that I don't make it too thin. If you don't get the rim established in that way, certainly in the past, in other bowls I've done, I've ended up with a very, very thin rim in parts, but very thick in others, so it's always good to get that trued up. So here you see me sorting out the foot. As I said, just a ring foot for it to sit on. Use those types of feet quite often in these rather shallow bowls or deep platters, blatters as some of you have kindly christened them. And now it's all about a finer cut, slower movement of the tool to get a much nicer finish. Of course, there will be some sanding involved. Then a little bit of scraping with the lower wing just to refine the shape a little bit. You can see there are still a few ridges in there that need to come out. I'm not sure if I've left all of the ridge removal footage in. There's only so much you can watch of the same thing over and over and over again. Or is that just me? To get in close and clean up the wood near that foot, I used a little spindle gouge, barely projecting over the tool rest, so it was very well supported. Sanding, Chestnut Products cut and polish, and then sanding that back with a bit of paper towel, and there you see the back in all its lovely wooden glory. Right, so turning it around in the chuck now. Obviously that big recess has done its job, but I need to put it onto that spigot now, so the luxury of having more than one chuck means I can just swap the chucks over and get it mounted up again. Now the front is quite uneven, and you can see a couple of little knot holes that I'd filled with a little bit of glue to stop them splitting. They did stop splitting, but it didn't mean that they weren't holes anymore, and you'll see I decided to leave those in. I could have filled them, especially as I'm going to use some gold on there, but I left them. It's wood, it's natural. It has cracks and holes, features, fissures, wrinkles, like a well-loved face. So, to add more interest to the top rather than a flat rim, look at me eyeballing there across the rim in that awkward position, I've gone for a curved rim. I think that adds a lot more interest when you're looking at the bowl or platter. You decide. And here I am just marking where I think the rim is going to finish. Certainly when I've done a curved rim like this, I want to define that edge. If I haven't done a curved rim, but I've done it slanting in, I might not mark it out quite so solidly as that. Right, now I could just oil it and leave it natural, but I suspect that's not what many of you come here for. So I'm going to work with red, black and gold on this one, I think. And I want to keep the figure. I'm not going to use this one as a canvas. It's one of the ones where I want the wood, the grain to come through. So start off with a coat of black, which will sand back, then red, possibly some orange as well, and then when that's all dry, I'm going to do something with some gold somehow. I haven't decided if I'm going to use gilt wax or gilt cream. At the moment, that's probably a day or so away, so I've got time to think about that. I've sanded this to 240. The one that I made earlier, this one, which was also a video posted in April, I sanded this to 400. I normally stop at 240. I thought I'd go to 400 and see what it was like, and it didn't. The colour didn't soak in. It sat on the surface for quite a long time, and in fact the oil that I put on there this morning is still waiting to dry properly. So see if it makes a difference sanding to 240. Here we go with the black. So just a very little needed. Now that is drying a bit quicker, I would say, than my experience of yesterday when I went to 400 grit. The difference between using stains and paints is the transparent nature of them, so you can see there still got the grain coming through. Right, we'll leave that to dry a few minutes and then a bit of sanding. Okay, so that's been sanded again, 240 grit. Just clean out the grain a little with a tack cloth. And some red. See, one tip of the bottle, plenty to cover. And then just finishing off with the grain. Okay, a second coat. Definitely darkening the colour. I hope you can see that in the picture. Let that dry a bit more. A little bit lumpy. There's a little bit of oil left on this rag, and that's helping to take it off from the surface and leaving it behind in the grain. Shine time. Bit of finishing oil. Now hopefully, because the gilt cream's had all night to dry, it's not going to pull it out from the grain. But we shall have to see. Seems to be all right, and it seems to have kept it in the grain, especially around here. I don't know how well the camera picks that up. Definitely the gold is still there. Okay, here we go then. A little variation on the theme of getting the grain to stand out, like I did with the blue and greenish one. The variation with this, apart from the colour, which in a certain light does look quite brown, oops, was filling the grain with the gold gilt cream or gilt wax. And that will show up on the close-ups. I really like this feather going on inside as well. The fact that you can see some of that, the contrast. I always really like it once the middle is turned out and clean against the coloured rim. No matter how much I like the coloured rim before the centre's been turned out, it always seems to look better against a really nice clean edge with some lovely natural wood inside. And that's just got some wax on it. I was contemplating doing a buffing session on this rim to get it even shinier, but as you can see, it's actually quite shiny as it is. So still images coming up, and thank you all for watching. Thank you to all of you who have subscribed, and thank you to new subscribers. Had a little jump in numbers recently, which is really pleasing. I'm delighted that I've got back in my shed and been able to do some turning. This had actually been on a chuck for about 5 weeks. So whatever I had that laid me low took its toll, but back in the swing of things. Turning and turning and turning. Until next time, thanks for watching. Now this will be an interesting experiment to see if anyone's still watching, even though there isn't a picture. No more Macbeth this week, no more ominous music, but just a request. I'm going to be doing some live streaming very soon, I hope. I've got some ideas of what I'd like to do, something hopefully that's not being done by other live streamers at the moment. But if there is anything you particularly would like to see, leave a comment below and I'll see what I can do. All right, cheers. Thanks for listening.